Okay, good morning, everybody. It looks like some more people are joining our session here, so we'll kind of slowly get started. Welcome to Wednesday. At least it's Wednesday here. Maybe it's not Wednesday where you are, but welcome to whatever day and time it is in your locale. Thanks for joining us for should be a pretty short session on business hours for CCE. Let's get started. If you have some questions along the way, don't hesitate to unmute yourselves and shout them out or make use of the chat window. Go for that. And just a couple things I didn't mention yesterday that maybe you should be aware of. If you've got some cool ideas about other topics you'd like to see us cover in the future presentations, throw those out there in the chat window. We have some other people from Sunset out here that are chiming in, hanging out in our session as well. So we'd like to hear exactly, what it is maybe that you're missing out there or what we could do better overall. So that's that. All right, let me get into it. And again, if you got any questions along the way, don't hesitate to ask. It shouldn't take too long. There's not a great amount of knowledge transfer required for business hours, but it is a newer feature you might want to know about. You might want to know exactly how it works. There's a couple of variables that we'll talk about. So let's take a look at the agenda here real quick. See if my screen will cooperate. There we go. So quick agenda. First off, let me go back a page. I realized I left something off the agenda here, but my name, of course, if you don't know it, is Mike. I'm your, instructor for this session here. I'm one of 3 instructors here at Sunset Learning that specialize in contact center enterprise. I'm not one of 3 instructors only, just one of 3 that focuses on contact center enterprise, be that packaged or use CCE. Collectively, I was telling one of our newer salespeople today that I think between the 3 of us, we've got about 65 years of background just in ICM and CCE and Cisco stuff overall. So each of us have spent about 20 years doing this in one way, shape, or form. Seen a lot of growth and transition, and some things remain the same a little bit. So that's my story. I'm an instructor here at Sunset, and if you've not had class with us before, we appreciate you coming and check some things out. We can usually save you a lot of time and frustration via some of the things that we can hopefully teach you about the solution. Okay. So here's a little snippet on that. Business hours overview. We'll have a discussion here on old versus new school methodology. That's really what this kind of comes down to, is logically you might have been doing probably in some form of business hours or holidays or whatever you want to call it all along, and maybe you've been using things like admin scripts to do that. You might kind of say now it's a little bit built into the solution, assuming you're a packaged customer. And then we'll get in and we'll show you how to actually do a couple things. We'll show you how to, of course, configure business hours. That's not too crazy, but there is kind of a ordered flow that you might use to keep yourself from having to go back and forth a couple of times. And we'll get into then scripting for business hours. So instead of using an admin script, you're basically within a routing script analyzing whether or not it's you're open or closed or it's a holiday or what the heck it is. And there's a couple of ways to do that. We'll show you that involve variables within the formula editor. In some case, we can do that dynamically. And if you stick around at the end, we'll tell you about our new classes that are coming up you might want to know about. We'll also maybe tell you how to win a new car. Not through Sunset, but we'll just tell you how to win a new car. I'd sign up for one of those new car raffles. That would be the answer to that. But we do have a marketing promotion to tell you how you might save some coinage on some upcoming classes overall. So that's worth checking out. All right, business hours overview. Business hours are the working hours of the organization, generally speaking. Working hours, working days. There's no default business hours configured. By the way, to the best of my knowledge, only because it's in the SPOG, this business hours is only available if you're a packaged customer. If anybody can refute that out there that's got CCE version 12, I'd be happy to hear that so that I'm not providing incorrect information. But to the best of my knowledge, this is only a packaged deal, at least currently right now. There's no default business hours that come configured on the system, i.e. it's not mandatory you use this. There's nothing by default that knows anything about what times you work as an organization. But remember, this can be an alternative to what you might have been doing previously with admin scripts. You might have had an admin script in ICM/CCE running that might have gone out and checked the time of day of week, maybe did some kind of a lookup in some kind of an XML document. Who knows what kind of stuff you had going on out there. A bunch of different options to determine whether or not you're open or closed. I'm not advocating maybe you rebuild the whole thing, just saying this is an alternative way to maybe figure out whether or not you're open or closed that you can use right within routing scripts directly. Typically, you use the results of your admin script within a routing script anyway to figure out if you're open or closed. And this is, you might just say, kind of eliminates one step in some way, shape, or form. Again, not advocating you reinvent the wheel here. So your business hours or working hours of the organization. Business hours are based on a selected time zone, as you'll see in the configuration. Where are you in theory versus, where the equipment is. A lot of times the equipment is in GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. At least that's what time it thinks it is, but where are you based? Business hours can be global or department based. One of the discussions this afternoon is regarding departments, and departments are really just a way and package to sublet a UCC environment, i.e. create a new line of business, sales versus support versus maybe some group over here or over there. I hate to use the word team because there's, teams have other associations in CCE, but that's kind of what you're doing is creating new teams or departments. Right? So business hours can be good for everybody or department based. We can actually force open or close our business hours, and we'll show you an example of that forthcoming. And what I mean by that is, normally you're open from 8 to 5 every day, Monday through Friday, except for, this afternoon we have some kind of big, company meeting picnic thing. So maybe what you need to do is go in there configuration-wise and actually force that particular department or business hour, business hour entry, to be closed. And wherever that is being used, those entities underneath there would, of course, feel that closed effect at that point in time. When we create business rules, we're going to create these things called status reasons first. Status reasons are basically closed or open reason codes. In some cases, you actually have to apply a reason code to a business hour. By example, if you're going to force a business hour open or closed intentionally, you have to put in some kind of a reason code. If a business hour by the calendar becomes open or closed, there's actually a reason code behind there. The reason code might be, well, it's after hours. So there's some built-in reason codes. The system reserved reason codes we'll show you. And there's some user-defined reason codes you can put in as well. These would all be assumedly reportable over there in the CCE world as well. So we create our status reasons first, right? Why are we open? Why are we closed? Is it a holiday? Is it, this, that, or the other thing? A weekend, whatever. And then we specify our regular days and hours of operation. I'm using terms here you'll actually see in the configuration. Status reasons is a term you'll see. Regular days and hours of operation is a term you'll see in the configuration. Your regular days are, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's what we normally work, or 24/7 or 24/5.5. We'll show you some examples. And then after that, you define special hours and holiday times, which will supersede your regular times. So when you specify the regular days and hours, you might kind of say it blocks out your working hours versus your non-working hours. And if you have other exceptions on top of that, like you're always open every third Tuesday afternoon or always closed every third Tuesday afternoon, that would be a special hours or holiday time that you would create in addition to. And those would be kind of like an access list moved up at the top and analyzed first. Is it within this exception time? No. Okay, well, we must be on our normal regular hours. When we define special hours and holiday times, have to use a status reason code, as we'll show you, to define what that is. It's a holiday. And there's also an import-export feature available. So if you've got a bunch of holidays listed or strange hours of operation listed, you can put all those in a CSV and suck those into the system without having to do that manually. And then our goal is to evaluate business hours within routing script using a couple of methods we'll talk to you about. And again, the business hours we're evaluating is actually the entry within the configuration we'll see here. So let's show you what all that actually means. So we're here in the SPOG. SPOG, remember, is the initialism, maybe acronym for single pane of glass. Single pane of glass is the latest and greatest in version 12 interface that incorporates 6 different things that you would be administering in CCE in one interface now. So ICM historically, or CCE, CVP, finesse administration can be done through here. VVB administration, identity services administration, and if you've got it integrated, ECE would be the 6th thing that you would be implementing or using via the SPOG interface. And one of these cards within the SPOG interface under the organization card, organization setup card, is where you'd find this entry called business hours. And again, I've never seen that over there in Configuration Manager, and I'm not sure if they've added that actually in version 12. It might very well be just in the web admin interface under business hours, so I could be wrong there. But to the best of my knowledge, it's a package thing only. So looks like adding or looking at the business hours here in this particular slide and noting there's a couple things I can do. I can create status reasons. I can create a new. Your probably mind goes right for the new, but really what you'd want to do probably first off is take a look at least, and or maybe add some new business hours or some new status reasons. You'll notice here that the ones declared as system defined, there's only 4 of them. Those come kind of built into the system. Weekday open reason, weekday closed reason. You'll see these 2 in use by default when you define your regular business hours. If it's normally open, the reason is because we're normally open. It's a weekday. And if it's closed, it'll be because we're closed on a weekday. Got some other entries here. Status of 100 and 101, unknown reason, invalid time zone. Those are just other reason codes added by the system. If you want to add your own reason codes, I've added a couple down here, holiday and COVID. Notice my reason code over there was 2020. Good thing that's gone now. So holidays, whatever other reason codes you might want to add, you would add them through this interface over here. We'll show you how they apply actually to business hours shortly. So now what I'm going to do once I've observed or maybe added some other status reasons, create a new business hour entry. First thing I actually want to do is give it a name down below. So I've given my business hour a name of sales open. Description is normally open hours for sales, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. is what I'm going with. These people are based in the mountain time, or at least that's the offset I'm going to use for this particular adventure here. You can see if not everybody in sales is in the mountain time zone, problems come up. Well, I don't know, maybe that's a good use of departments. By default, if you have no department entries in CCE, the department would be just declared as global department. And notice that my status up here got some options. Open, close as per business calendar, which we have yet to define in one of these other 2 tabs in the back end, or force open or force close. So we'll see this as a function administratively downstream. Maybe you need to force a department open because it's after hours and people are needing to work, or opposite, it's during hours, but everybody is, going to that company picnic for the day or whatnot. So you can force a business hour open or closed. But when you do, that's where this status reason would come into effect. If you've just got a regular status running as a function of the calendar, no reasons necessary. The calendar, you might say, will automatically assign this reason as needed, okay, as you'll see here in a second. If you want to force something open or closed, you have to put in some specific reason. Off to a couple more tabs, you see now on the top left-hand side, we've got our regular hours. Our regular hours, we've got a couple of choices here. We can just pick 24/7, in which case we're open 24/7. Or if you go with the entry here for custom, by default, what it puts in there is, I believe, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And if you want to modify those hours or minutes of operation, you can certainly do that. That's just kind of what it gives you out of the box. So you can see here, I think for sales, we said it was 8 to 5. So I've simply gone in there, got a little thumb wheel. You can move your times up or down as needed. Same thing with the entry here called special hours and holidays. That's just the third tab you would encounter in the configuration over here. You can see that special hours are the business hours longer or shorter than the regular hours. Special hours and holidays have higher priority over regular hours. Now, I don't know. I messed around with this a little bit. I don't know that I'm a full-on expert, but one thing I found kind of awkward to try to do would be to seemingly set just a specific time range where I'm actually going to be closed. Like I'm really closed from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. on a specific day. It seemed like that was kind of awkward or hard to do in here, but play around with this. Again, there's an import feature that with the CSV that you can download and fill in. You can see you've got a date description. The status is open or closed, start time, end time, and a reason code, right, that you would have from your other reason codes that you put in. You can also just add entries in here manually. Pretty easy to do. So we've added in New Year's Day. It's actually from screenshot from last year, and looks like the day that we would be actually celebrating Independence Day. And last year that was the 3rd of July. So that was the day we were off. All right, sounds good. What is interesting now is that when you add your business hours, what shows up is, of course, the business hours you've configured. I've got 2 going on in this screenshot. I got sales open and support open. Sales is open 8 to 5. Support is open for more extended period of time, right? 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. or something of that nature. So what's a little bit interesting here is that when you actually look at your business hours, the status over here, which doesn't actually display until you refresh the screen, I seem to notice, is actually dynamically updated based on what the current conditions are. The screenshot was actually taken after 5 p.m., but before 10 p.m. So we had a case where sales was actually closed and support was actually open based on that time zone. So that's kind of cool. And you'll notice that dynamically or automatically, what the system also did was threw in those reason codes of 1 and 2. So those were the system reason codes that said, hey, we're closed because of the being a weekday closed reason, right? It was after hours. Same thing with the weekday open reason. We're open because according to the hours of operation, you're open. That's cool. You can also see department in here. Department won't actually show up unless you actually have departments. So that won't be a field you would see if you don't have any departments configured over there. And that's kind of a good way, just at a glance, to see, geez, something isn't working right or as advertised with our maybe logic in our script regarding business hours. Well, come back to this screen and see what the system thinks you're doing. If the system thinks you're closed and you believe you're open, well, according to the system, you're closed, right? Based on what you've got configuration-wise going on there. All right, scripting considerations. There's really a couple of things you want to think about with scripting here. There's really 3 different ways you might say to analyze business hours within scripts, or 3 mechanisms. I don't know about ways. There's a bunch of ways to do it, but 3 mechanisms. We've got, it looks like an if node here. We'll show you a case where in some cases you have to use an if node, but in other cases you're just trying to figure out, are we open or not? And of course, generally speaking, if we are open, we hope to probably take the success terminal. And if we're closed, we probably want to take the failure terminal over here. And we've got a formula that we've created in our if node. So in our formula editor, and notice that one of our object types now, new in version 12, is an object type of business hours. If you don't see that object type, you might not be in the right node that supports that. By example, a queue to skill group node would have a consider if statement in there. And if you open that up, if that function is not available, that object type, you might have to actually use an if node in front of that. You might check that out. And notice that once I select business hours as my object type, I've got a couple of objects. We'll talk about the squiggly brackets over here in a second. Other than that, what shows up now, kind of like selecting call types, are my business hours. So again, those are the names, sales open or support open, were the two business hours I had configured. And it looks like for each of my business hours, I've got a couple of variables. Business hours status I can analyze. I can also look for a reason code. So we'll show you examples of all three of these things here coming up. The first example, it looks like we're looking for the business hour status variable for our sales open business hour. All right, that's how I'd read that. And we're looking to see if the status is equal to 1. Well, according to, I guess it's Bruce over here, 1 means we're open, and 0 would mean we're closed. So if you're trying to look to see if you're closed or not, you'd be looking for a 0. If you're trying to look, see if you're open, you'd be looking for a 1 in this case, which we're looking for, which drives that success or failure terminal outcome. So be aware for this formula, these success and failures are true. And again, that's all based on the status over there that we pointed out, right? What does the system think the status of that particular business hour is right now? In this case, sales would be open and support would be, support would be open and sales would be closed. That was the case. So for sales open, looks like we're closed. And, you know, it doesn't mean you're really failing something. You're just going off to do something else, like maybe play the after hours message to callers and then do some kind of a disconnect or whatever it is you're doing. Another way to implement business hours is to, instead of looking for the business hour status, maybe you intentionally need to look for some kind of a reason code. So got, in this particular case, another reason code defined over here, reason code 2244. I just made up these numbers. And that particular reason is a sales meeting. So we had some kind of big sales meeting everybody had to go to. So let's close down that sales department. If we had an if node, again, as an example, somewhere in a script right before we sent some calls to sales, maybe what we'd be doing here is to say, hey, let's see if the sales open business hours has a reason code set of 2244. And if so, I don't know, we play the sorry, all salespeople are in a meeting right now message to the callers and then transfer those people to support. Who knows what you want to do, but that's just a kind of a cheesy example. And remember that you might be doing this because what you might have is some administrator that you've given some rights to actually go into this business hour and maybe force this business hour. Again, I'm saying, sounds kind of weird, force the business hour closed, but that's really what you're doing. You're kind of forcing this variable, for all intents and purposes, to be populated with something, or, you know, in this case, be true. And so notice if I force this sales open business hour entry to be closed, what I have to supply is the status reason, in this case, which is sales meeting, and sales meeting is that status code of 2244. Now, again, this might be a long way around something, but we're just showing you you've got some options over here, okay, based on what configuration and what you've adopted for housekeeping of reason codes and business hours in your environment. Another way to dynamically select a business hour, not really dynamically creating anything. We're just trying to figure out which business hour are we trying to analyze. Are we looking for sales business hour, sales open, or support open business hour? Well, envision, if you would, maybe we ran some kind of call studio application that figured out whether or not the caller wanted to go to sales or support. And if they want to go to sales or support, what we're going to pass back from our call studio application is also the name of the business hour we're going to use. And maybe we're passing that back in this cheesy example in array index number 3 in our from external VXML ECC variable, call variable, right? So this is just making stuff up here left and right, but If that's the case, if that variable has been populated somewhere along the way with either sales open or support, I'm sorry, sales closed or support closed, whatever the heck I named them, sales open or support open, and we want to dynamically look at that name. Again, all these things have to match case sensitivity and spelling wise for sure, but notice what we're doing is we're just looking for whatever the dynamic business hour is. We're trying to see if the status is one or not. Are we open or are we closed? Okay. So these curly brackets we use to define which business hour object to match based on a variable. We must use peripheral variables 1 through 10 or user defined ECC variables. That's not too hard to actually do. And in this case, you must use an if node to analyze it, and there's no chaining of formulas. What we mean by that is you can't do a is business hours status equal 1 or blah, blah, blah equal to 0 or blah, 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 blah. Apparently, you can't do chaining of formulas. Why? I don't know. And how many you can't do, I'm not sure. Maybe you ought to try it, see if it actually works, but just be aware that that was in the scripting guide in a couple of places where they said, hey, if you're using this, you can't be chaining formulas together. So, okay, sounds good. There you have it. That's about it on business hours. The next thing I'm going to get into is just our new upcoming classes. But anybody got any crazy questions on business hours out there that we can answer for you?
Hi, Mike. This is Evelyn.
Hello.
So we're currently using admin scripts to control our business hours, and we are planning to do an upgrade to 12.6 here shortly. How would you recommend that we transition from using admin scripts to do business hours to this type of management of business hours?
A fine question. I guess my personal answer would be first off to say, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? Just because we've got business hours added in version 12 doesn't mean you have to use them. If you're still using admin scripts and they still work for right now, great. Leave those alone and maybe start to use these just on a onesie twosie basis, right? You got a new department that you've configured and created. They do some weird hours of operation. Maybe that's a good chance to try that for this one department. I certainly wouldn't want to try to roll it out in mass, but just like you eat an elephant, one bite at a time is what my answer would be for you. Does that help out?
So if you have both methods defined, does one take precedence?
No, only because hopefully what you're doing is you're not using both methods within your routing script. Remember that typically what you're doing with your admin script is just determining whether you're open or not, and then setting a variable accordingly. And then in your routing script, at least in my experience, you're looking to see if the value of that variable has been set to a 1 or 37 or whatever it is, indicating you're open or closed. So you're doing really the same thing that you're doing here, just in a different method, right? So as long as you're not looking twice at the value of your admin script variable and then looking at the business hours variable, and if those were different, well, whatever node you go through last is what your end result is going to be, is what I'm going to vote on that.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help out?
Yeah.
Fine question. Anyone else have some questions out there? Thanks for the question. Appreciate that.
Hey, this is Daniel. I have a question about the web configuration portion of it. Is there a way to lock down permissions based on department? For example, I want to give a salesperson responsibility and ability to just configure opening closed for sales departments.
Yes, indeed there is. As a matter of fact, in this afternoon's discussion, we get into departments, and one of the tenets of basic principles of creating a department is probably ought to create some administrators ahead of time, because when you create a department, you can assign an administrator. And historically in ICM, we've always had these things called feature control set lists. And if you didn't implement them, you didn't really know about them. But feature control sets were very powerful. They actually allowed you to specify down to, even like a per node basis in scripting. You could actually give somebody access to modify or not. They weren't often used at that specific nature, but That's kind of what they were called. And that term called feature control set list has really been replaced now with just, groups and rights and permissions and normal terms that you would see in the package world, where you can definitely take somebody and give them only very specific rights to something that they can do within the spot. So I would say, yes, that's something you can make happen quite easily. And there's, some other creative ways that maybe you think about how you might, if I can interpret your question, you're trying to give somebody other than you at 2 a.m. The ability to open or close something based on, some emergency. So if you think about maybe this example here where we're dynamically setting something, we could actually have, I'm just kind of thinking cheesy outside the box here, but a hidden IVR menu that somebody knows to dial in. Only from this number can you actually set a value, press a 1, and that 1 gets passed somewhere that helps to indicate whether or not you're going to be open or closed. That's kind of what we did with admin scripts, but some other kind of cheesy ways of doing some things here, I suppose, that you could use to populate maybe the contents of what business hour you're trying to use within a flow. But again, just some cheesy ways of thinking outside the box. But hopefully, Daniel, answer your question is yes, we can limit who has access to doing this. If that helps.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else out there? Okay, a couple things marketing wise you might want to know about. If it's been a while that you've come to class, or if you've got some new stuff coming up on version 12, Bruce and Mark and myself, my 2 other coworkers, just spent about the last 18 months of our life developing some new courseware for Cisco. And some of these courses we've been kind of running here and there a little bit along the way. They're all officially coming out from Cisco. We've heard shortly once they do all their stuff over there on their end. But we've got basically 3 new tracks, you might say. We've got in a 5-day curriculum, a foundations course. This is really an executive overview course. If you need to know about CCE, but you don't use it on a daily basis, in 1 day, that's our foundations course. The administration course is 4 days. So that's your basic moves, adds, and changes course that new people should take to the environment. If you've been around for a while using CCE, we've got an advanced admin course. We get a lot deeper into passing variables and call data back and forth, and formulas and functions and all kinds of cool stuff in there. The reporting class, implementing CUIC, typically a follow-on 2-day along with that 3-day course. You can take the 3-day, you can take the 2-day, you can take the 2-day and 3-day. Very flexible out there. We recognize that all of you can't be gone for 5 days all the time. And then some classes to not overlook. We've got an implementation course, and troubleshooting course is good. I'd highly recommend the implementation course, even if you're not implementing package. If somebody else is doing it, give you a much better perspective on how things go together. We'll also talk about everybody's favorite subject, which would be security certificates in that class. So who wouldn't want to take that? And so you can see there's 1 week, there's another week, there's a 3rd week. This kind of supplants or replaces a little bit our deployment course, our DUCCE. We had an AUCCE part 1 and a part 2, right? Advanced admin. So a little bit similar. CUIC was along the way. That was a 3-day class. So Cisco, as well as us, we've kind of compressed some things. All this stuff is all based on PCCE version, really 12.5, 12.6, 12.x, we'll call it. We've got 12.6 in the lab currently. We've also got an ECE class. That's 4 days of ECE goodness. If you come to us for 4 days of that class, guaranteed, I will give you back those 4 days in pain, misery, and just outright knowledge in the next 6 months, right? So we can save you a lot of time and effort if you come to that ECE class instead of trying to figure it out maybe on your own. We will save you time. So let us know if we can help you figure out those classes, of course, you can go to our website. There you go. Thanks for your time today, people. I appreciate you coming.